The elf guards laughed as they passed the human workers, their silver armor shining in the sunlight. Tall trees arched high above the road, their leaves whispering secrets only the elves could hear. Everything in Silverant was beautiful, too beautiful. Even the prisons were carved from white stone, polished by hand. But the people inside were not free. Cale stood in the shadows of the forge, hands black with soot. His shirt was torn at the sleeves, and his feet ached from standing too long. He watched the guards with quiet eyes, saying nothing. They never looked at him for more than a second. Just a human, they thought. Not worth the breath. But Cale was listening, always listening. He listened to the way the elves spoke to each other. He listened when they argued, when they got lazy, and when they forgot that humans could think. He learned things, small things, dangerous things, where the keys were kept, which guards drank too much, which doors creaked, and most important of all, where the old temple had fallen. Long ago, before the elves came from across the sea, humans had their own cities, their own kings, their own magic. But that was long gone now. The elves had broken the human armies and burned their books. Now, humans were slaves, some born to clean, some to fight, and others, like Cale, to work the fires of the forges. Tonight, when the moon rose high, Cale would slip away. No one would miss him. He had made sure of that. The forge master drank heavy before bed, and the other workers were too afraid to speak. Beneath the forge was a tunnel, half forgotten, covered in dust and spiderwebs. Cale had found it weeks ago. It led into the ruins of a temple, buried under roots and rubble. Most said the place was cursed. Elves avoided it. That made Cale curious. He lit a small lantern and crept into the dark. The tunnel smelled of stone and old earth. He moved slowly, careful not to make a sound. At the end of the path, under a broken altar, he found something strange. It was a stone, shaped like a heart, glowing faintly with red light. It was warm, and when he touched it, his fingers tingled. Then he heard it, just a whisper. Embercore. Cale stepped back, heart racing. He looked around, but there was no one else. Just the whisper, soft and low, like it had come from inside his mind. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was not Elven. This belonged to humans, and it had waited a long time to be found. Cale picked up the stone. The glow flared brighter. Something deep inside him stirred, like a fire waking from sleep. The elves had taken everything from his people. But maybe, just maybe, the time had come to take something back. Cale walked back to the forge with the embercore in his hand, his heart beating faster than ever. The stone still pulsed with heat, its glow hidden beneath his tunic. He had no idea what it could do, but he knew one thing. It was powerful, and it was his. When he reached the forge, the usual sounds greeted him. The clang of metal, the hiss of the fire, and the low murmurs of the other workers. None of them looked up as Cale moved toward his station. They were all too busy, lost in their own tasks, resigned to the lives they had. Cale, though, was different. He had a purpose now. Something had changed in him when he touched the embercore. The night passed slowly. The embercore was hot against his skin, burning softly, like it was alive. Cale could feel it calling to him, urging him to do something. He didn't know what yet, but he was ready to find out. After the forge master had finished his rounds and the workers had settled down for a break, Cale slipped away. He made his way to a small alley near the back of the forge where no one would see him. There, hidden in the shadows, he opened his hand and held the embercore up to the moonlight. It shone brighter now, as if it recognized the night. Cale stared at it, his mind racing. What was this thing? Where had it come from? And why had it chosen him? The answer didn't come, but a sense of understanding settled in his chest. He felt power, real power, coursing through his fingers. It wasn't like magic, the kind the elves used, that wrapped around everything in the world. This power was different. It was wild, untamed, like a fire that had been buried deep and was now rising. Cale closed his fist around the ember core. He had no time to waste. The next day, he didn't go to the forge. Instead, he slipped into the streets, moving quietly through the city, keeping to the shadows. He knew where he needed to go, the lower district, a place where humans were sent when they broke the rules, where the poorest and most desperate lived. There, he could find the kind of people who would listen. Cale didn't have many friends in the city, but he didn't need many. He knew just who to talk to. Grim, the old blacksmith who had once tried to rebel, before the elves crushed his shop and took everything. Nora, a young woman who worked in the kitchens and had helped spread word about the hidden tunnels under the city. And Dren, a street runner who could get anything from anywhere, if the price was right. They would understand. They would listen. Because, deep down, they'd all hated the elves. The way they looked down on humans, the way they treated them like animals. Cale found them in an old alleyway, under a crooked sign that read Frostbite Tavern. Inside, the air smelled of old bread and sweat. Grim sat at a table, his hands wrapped in cloth, eyes narrow. Nora was wiping down a counter, and Dren was standing near the door, his face half hidden in a hood. Cale sat down with them, his eyes scanning the room. Once they noticed him, he didn't waste time. "We have something," he said quietly, pulling out the ember core. It gleamed in the dim light. The others froze. "What is that?" Nora whispered. "I don't know, but I think it's the key to starting a fire the elves won't be able to put out." Grim studied it for a moment. "You think it's a weapon?" "No," Cale said, shaking his head. "Not a weapon, but something much stronger." The group sat in silence for a long time, the ember core glowing between them. "We need to gather more," Dren said finally. "If this is real, we can change everything." Cale nodded. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt since he was a child, before the elves had taken everything. Hope. The days after Cale met with Grim, Nora, and Dren passed quickly. The ember core was in his hands again, its glow hidden beneath his tunic. They had a plan now, a dangerous one, but a plan that could change everything. They needed to gather the rest of the artifacts, and that meant traveling into the Elven heartland. Cale's heart beat faster as he walked through the streets of Silverend. The city was always bustling, but there was something different now. The elves, who once moved with the grace of untouchable gods, now seemed like shadows in the corners of his mind. They had no idea what was coming. He met with his allies in secret, in the same dim alley where they had spoken before. They gathered in hushed tones, their eyes glancing nervously over their shoulders. This wasn't like before. There was no turning back now. They all knew it. "The next piece is in the Garden of Light," Cale said, his voice steady but low. "It's hidden inside the vaults, buried beneath the trees of the Elven King's palace. And what makes you think we can get it?" Grim asked, his voice rough. His hands were covered in soot from his work, but there was fire in his eyes now. Fire that had been missing for years. "Because we can't let them keep us in the dark anymore," Cale replied. "We know their secrets, their weaknesses. The elves think they're untouchable, but they're not." Nora nodded, a determined look on her face. "I'll get us inside. The kitchen is a perfect place to start. The elves think they control everything, but we know where their blind spots are. And I can bring the tools we'll need," Dren added, his voice sharp. He was always the first to act when things needed to be done. "The guards will never see us coming." Cale looked at each of them, his heart filling with hope. They had all suffered under the elves, in one way or another. Now, they were all united by a single goal, to fight back, to take what was theirs. The Garden of Light was a place of beauty, a place where the elves believed their gods danced among the trees. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and sweet fruit. It was a place of peace, or so the elves thought. In reality, it was a place of secrets. The vaults beneath the garden held treasures the elves had stolen from humans long ago. Relics of a forgotten age. The plan was simple: get inside, find the vault, and take what they needed. But nothing was simple in a city built on lies and magic. The night they set out, the moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the city. Kale and his team moved quietly through the streets, keeping to the alleys and shadows. Their hearts beat in time with their footsteps, each of them thinking the same thing. If they were caught, everything would be over. They reached the edge of the garden, its gates tall and imposing. The guards were few, but they were skilled. Kale's pulse quickened. Now was the moment. Nora slipped ahead, moving like a shadow, and soon she was inside the garden, her movements quick and silent. Time seemed to stretch. Every second felt like an eternity. Then came the signal, a soft whistle, a signal to move. The ground shook beneath Kale's feet. He froze, his hand on the cold surface of the vault door. The rumbles grew louder, closer. It wasn't just the wind. The elves were coming. They had been warned. Nora, Dren, and Grim all tensed. Kale could see the fear in their eyes. But there was something else, too: determination. They had come too far to turn back now. "We need to move," Kale said, his voice low but firm. He could feel the ember core in his pocket, warm and pulsing like a heartbeat. The power it gave him surged within him, making him feel alive, like he could face the world itself. Nora, ever quick on her feet, pressed her ear to the vault door. "It's locked, but not for long," she whispered. Her hands moved quickly, finding the hidden latch. Just a few more seconds. The sounds of footsteps grew louder, closer, and Kale could hear the faint whispers of magic in the air. The elves were casting their wards, preparing for an ambush. He knew they had no time to waste. "Hurry," Grim urged, his voice tense. "If we don't get this open, we'll be trapped." Kale looked around, trying to figure out their best escape route. The garden was full of tall trees and winding paths, but there was nowhere to hide if they were discovered. He glanced at the sky, where the moon hung just above the treetops, casting long shadows over the garden. Then, without warning, a cold wind swept through the trees, carrying the sound of distant voices. The elves were close, and they were not alone. They had summoned their magic. "They'll be on us in minutes," Dren said, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife, ready for whatever was to come. Kale could feel the ember core growing warmer in his pocket. It wanted to be used, to be released. He wasn't sure exactly what it would do, but he didn't have the luxury of time to figure it out. They had to make their move. "Nora, is it ready?" Kale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her fingers working fast. "Just about." Before she could finish, there was a sharp click, and the vault door swung open with a quiet groan. Inside, the vault was dark, but the faint glow of the ember core illuminated the space enough to see the rows of shelves, each filled with ancient relics and artifacts. The very treasures that the elves had hidden away. Kale didn't hesitate. He stepped into the vault, his eyes scanning the shelves for what they needed. He could hear the elves' footsteps getting closer, their voices rising in anger. "Take what you can," Kale ordered. "We're not leaving empty-handed." Grim, Dren, and Nora moved quickly, grabbing what they could carry: old scrolls, enchanted weapons, and small stones that hummed with magic. Kale's eyes narrowed as he spotted a strange, glowing orb at the far end of the vault. He reached out and grabbed it, feeling a shock of energy shoot through his hand. The moment he touched it, the ember core in his pocket flared with heat. The ground beneath him rumbled again, but this time it wasn't the elves. It was the magic, alive and powerful, swirling in the air around them. Kale's heart raced. He could feel it, the power of the ember core, and now the orb, coming together. "We need to move, now," Kale shouted, turning toward the exit. But just as they were about to leave, the vault door slammed shut. The sound of footsteps from the elves grew deafening, and the air seemed to crackle with magic. They were trapped. Kale's grip tightened around the orb, the ember core still pulsing in his pocket. Whatever was coming next, he knew one thing for certain. It was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for everything. Kale's heart raced as he stared at the sealed vault door. The elves were almost there. He could hear their footsteps, their soft voices, the hum of magic in the air. They were closing in, and he knew they wouldn't show mercy. The orb in his hand pulsed, its energy vibrating through his fingers. The ember core in his pocket burned hotter, as if calling to the orb. The two objects were connected, their magic powerful enough to make the very air feel alive, buzzing with anticipation. "We don't have much time," Grim muttered, glancing toward the door. "They'll be here any second." Nora was already scanning the walls of the vault. She had the look of someone who had been in tight spots before, but even she was starting to feel the pressure. Dren stood at the back, his eyes darting between the others and the approaching sounds of the elves. He was ready to fight if it came to that, but Kale could tell he was also worried. "Kale, what do we do?" Nora asked, her voice steady but strained. "This door won't hold much longer. We need a way out." Kale's mind raced. The ember core had given him power before, but he didn't fully understand it. The orb in his hand, whatever it was, felt like it could do something more, something that might help them escape. But how? His fingers tightened around the orb, and suddenly, the world around him seemed to slow. He could feel the air thickening, the magic swirling, his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The ember core in his pocket was pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a connection, a link between the two objects, between himself and something much larger than he could understand. The rumble in the ground intensified, and Kale's thoughts sharpened. He had no time to figure this out fully. They were about to be caught, and if they didn't act now, they would lose everything. He had to trust what he felt, even if he didn't fully understand it. Without thinking, he raised the orb high. The magic flared, lighting up the vault in a bright, fiery glow. The ember core pulsed, matching the rhythm of the orb. Then, as if it had always known what to do, the orb sent a wave of energy crashing through the air. The walls around them seemed to shake, and the vault door shuddered, groaning under the pressure of the magic. Grim stepped back, eyes wide. "What's happening?" Kale didn't answer. He focused on the power flowing through him, trusting the ember core and the orb to guide him. The air around them crackled, and in the blink of an eye, the vault door shattered into pieces, the magic forcing it apart like a twig in a storm. "Go!" Kale shouted. The group didn't hesitate. They ran through the shattered door, the sound of elves rushing toward them echoing in the distance. The garden of light stretched out before them, but they didn't stop to look around. They had no time. They had to move. "This way!" Kale yelled, leading the way through the maze of trees. His heart raced as he pushed forward, the magic from the orb still pulsing in his veins. It wasn't over yet. They were still being hunted. They raced through the garden, the sound of footsteps behind them growing louder. Suddenly, Dren pointed ahead. There, the tunnel. It was a narrow passage, hidden by overgrown vines. Kale could see it, and with no time to waste, he shoved the vines aside and led the way into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth. They moved quickly, each step taking them further from the danger. But Kale couldn't shake the feeling that the elves were still close, too close. The orb in his hand pulsed one last time, a final burst of energy. Kale glanced at it, and for a moment, he swore he could see something in its depths, something ancient, something far more powerful than anything the elves had ever shown. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for freedom. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, its walls cold and damp. The faint sound of footsteps behind them told Kale that the elves hadn't given up the chase. His breath was heavy, his heart racing as he led the group deeper into the darkness. Every step they took seemed to echo, but they couldn't afford to slow down. How much farther? Grim asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. The old blacksmith's hands were slick with sweat, and his breath came in short gasps. Cale could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted nervously to the shadows behind them. The weight of the situation was pressing on them all. Just a little longer, Cale replied, trying to keep his voice calm. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running. The elves had the advantage. They were faster. They knew the land better, and they had magic that could track them down in an instant. But Cale had something they didn't, a hidden power, something he didn't fully understand yet, but it was there. The Ember Core. The orb. Together, they made him feel strong, like he could do anything. He just had to figure out how to use it. The tunnel twisted ahead, and Cale could see the faintest light in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them hope. They moved toward it, their footsteps quick and quiet. "Keep moving," Cale urged. "We're almost there." Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, and they emerged into a small underground chamber. The light came from cracks in the stone, where the moonlight filtered through from above. The air here was cooler, less heavy, but it still smelled of earth. Cale scanned the room. There were old stone pillars, half covered in moss and vines, and the remnants of an ancient structure that had long since fallen into ruin. It looked like a forgotten place, untouched by time. This was where the elves had hidden their secrets. "What is this place?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she looked around. She had a way of staying calm in the most dangerous situations, but Cale could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "This is it," Cale said quietly. "The place where they kept everything. The relics, the weapons, the magic." Grim stepped forward, his boots crunching on the broken stone floor. "So what now? How do we stop them?" Cale didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the orb in his hand. It still hummed with power, its glow flickering in the dim light. He could feel the Ember Core inside his pocket too, like it was alive and waiting for something. "We need to understand this," Cale said, holding up the orb. "We need to learn what it can do. It's the key." But as he spoke, the ground beneath them rumbled. The air grew colder, and the cracks in the walls seemed to widen, letting in more of the moonlight. The stones shifted, and a low growl echoed from the far side of the chamber. Something was coming. "They found us," Dren muttered, his hand on the hilt of his blade. Cale's mind raced. They had no time to waste. The elves were closing in fast, and this place, this forgotten chamber, was about to become a battleground. He could feel the Ember Core pulsing stronger now, urging him to act, to fight, to do something. "Whatever happens," Cale said, his voice hard with determination, "we stand together. We make our stand here." Grim nodded, and Nora tightened her grip on a dagger she had taken from the vault. Dren, ever watchful, stepped into a defensive stance. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Elven boots, quick and purposeful. Cale raised the orb higher, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what would happen, but he knew one thing for certain. This was their chance. The Ember Core, the orb, the power, it was all connected. And now, it was time to unleash it. Cale felt the weight of the orb in his hands, its glow growing brighter as the rumbling of the ground increased. The air around him seemed to hum, thick with tension. The elves were close, and he could hear the sound of their footsteps growing louder in the dark chamber. The walls seemed to close in on them, pressing down with an almost unbearable weight. "They're coming," Nora whispered, her voice tight with fear. But her eyes never wavered from Cale's face. "We can't keep running. We'll have to fight." Grim gripped his hammer, his muscles tensing as he shifted his weight. "If we're going down fighting." Dren stood closest to the entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. "We'll hold them off," he said, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Even he knew they were outmatched, outnumbered, and outclassed by the elves. Their strength, their magic, it was all too much. Cale's gaze flickered to the orb in his hand. It pulsed with an energy that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth, as if the ancient power inside it was awakening. It was no longer just a tool, but something more, a force that could change everything. But how? How could he unlock its full power? He didn't have the answers, not yet. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't let the elves win. Not this time. They had taken too much already. "We're not alone in this," Cale said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This power, it's ours. We fight for ourselves, for everyone they've hurt. They won't stop until we're all crushed beneath their boots, but we won't let them." Grim nodded, his grip tightening on his hammer. "Right, let's give them something to remember." Nora stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the dark entrance. "We'll fight with everything we have, for every human they've trampled." Dren gave a quick, sharp nod, his hand steady on his blade. They were ready to stand together, no matter what came next. The ground rumbled again, louder this time, as if the earth itself was preparing for the battle. And then, with a sudden crash, the elves appeared. Their glowing forms moved through the shadows like ghosts, tall and powerful, their eyes gleaming with arrogance. They had magic, strength, and centuries of knowledge. They believed they were untouchable. But Cale wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He felt the power inside the orb flare, felt it thrumming through his veins. The ember core in his pocket pulsed in answer, and for a moment, he felt connected to something much larger than himself. Something ancient, something fierce. The first elf leader stepped forward, their voice a cold command. "Surrender, human. This rebellion ends now." Cale didn't hesitate. He raised the orb high, feeling the power surging through him. The ember core in his pocket flared, responding to the orb's call. The room seemed to crackle with energy, and for the first time, Cale understood. This was their moment. "No," he said, his voice firm, filled with defiance. "This ends now. Not for us. For you." And with that, he unleashed the energy from the orb. The explosion of light and power shot out in every direction, sending a wave of heat and magic through the chamber. The elves recoiled, their magical shields flickering, but the force of the blast was too much. The air shimmered with energy as the ground beneath them cracked open, and for the first time in centuries, the elves were caught off guard. The fight had begun. The explosion of light and magic rocked the chamber, the air thick with heat and the crackle of energy. Cale stood at the center of it, heart pounding, as the orb's power flowed through him. The elves stumbled back, their eyes wide in shock. Their shields flickered, struggling to hold against the force of the blast. "This is impossible," one of the elf commanders hissed, her voice filled with disbelief. Cale's hands were still raised, the orb glowing brighter with every second. The ember core in his pocket was burning hot, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to match the rapid beat of his heart. He could feel it all, the power, the magic, the strength of everything he had fought for. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a fight for survival. It felt like a fight for freedom. "They can't stop us," Cale said, his voice steady, despite the chaos around him. "We're not just humans anymore. We're more than that." Grim stepped forward, his hammer ready. His usual calm was replaced with a fire that matched the intensity in Cale's eyes. "Let's show them what humans are made of." Nora and Dren moved into position, their weapons at the ready. They had fought many battles together, but this one felt different. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were fighting for their right to exist, to be free from the elves' grip. The elves, now visibly shaken, regrouped. Their magic crackled in the air, but it was clear that they were struggling. They had never encountered anything like this before. The orb's energy was unlike any magic they had ever known. "We must stop them," another elf shouted. "Do whatever it takes." They raised their hands, and the air around them shimmered as they called upon their magic. Bolts of energy shot toward Kale and his group, but Kale was ready. He focused on the orb, willing it to do what he knew it could. The magic surged, and with a sharp motion of his hand, he sent a blast of power forward, colliding with the elves' attack. The chamber shook, and the ground trembled beneath them. The elves' magic faltered, and for the first time, they hesitated. The balance of power was shifting. "We have to push," Kale urged, his voice low but full of urgency. "This is our chance." Grim roared and swung his hammer, knocking down the first elf who dared to come close. Nora was quick, moving like a shadow, striking with precision. Dren was at her side, his blade flashing as he cut down another elf who tried to flank them. The fight became a blur of magic and steel, but Kale kept his focus on the orb. He felt its power coursing through him, amplifying his every movement, his every thought. The elves were powerful, but their magic couldn't match the raw force of the Ember Core and the orb. They were running out of time. The elf leader, an ancient warrior with glowing silver eyes, stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Kale. She raised her staff high, summoning a storm of energy. "You are foolish to think you can win," she said coldly. "The elves have ruled for millennia. We cannot be beaten by mere humans." Kale met her gaze, his own eyes burning with defiance. "You've ruled long enough." With a final surge of power, Kale channeled the energy from the orb and the Ember Core, sending it crashing into the elf leader's attack. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light, and when it cleared, the elf leader was on the ground, her magic broken. The other elves hesitated, fear creeping into their eyes. They had never been defeated like this. Kale stepped forward, his voice strong. "This is over," he said. "We are no longer your subjects. We are free." The elves, realizing they had lost, began to retreat, their arrogance shattered. The power had shifted, and for the first time in history, humans had proven they were more than just pawns in the elves' game. They were something stronger, something the elves could no longer control. As the elves disappeared into the shadows, Kale looked around at his friends. Their faces were bruised, but they were smiling, their eyes filled with relief. They had done it. They had won. And for the first time in his life, Kale felt like a true hero.